Compassion is concern with the alleviation of suffering. There's a big physiological component to self-compassion because as mammals, attachment, love, care is built into our system. So our central nervous system is very activated. So for instance, physical touch is a really easy way to practice self-compassion. And what we find is that like putting your own hands on your heart increases heart rate variability, heart rate coherence, reduces cortisol in the same way that if someone else would like to give you a hug or put their hand on your shoulder. The body doesn't really know the difference. So there was a study that came out of UC Berkeley a couple years ago that showed just 20 seconds a day of maybe putting your hand some supportive place and saying a few supportive words can significantly increase your self-compassion levels.
Hello and welcome back to the FitMind podcast, where we talk about mental fitness and neuroscience. I'm your host Josh, and today we have an amazing episode with Dr. Kristin Neff. Originally inspired by the amazing Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings on self-compassion, she saw immediate personal benefits, which I can also attest to myself. This is an amazing technique that can really affect your default state, which we dive a little bit further into on this podcast. And we also talk about embracing negativity. This doesn't replace the negative with the positive, but embraces it with warmth and support. This is not selfish. It really replenishes our resources, reduces burnout, improves our ability to care for others. Without further ado, I really hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Let's dive in with Dr. Kristin Neff. Kristin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here, yeah.
Before we get any further in, I'd love to dive into how it was that you came to studying self-compassion.
Yeah, well, for me, similar to you, it started as a personal practice. It was my last year of graduate school back in the 90s. And I was going through a really stressful period in my life. And so I thought I would learn mindfulness meditation because I had heard it was good for stress. And fortunately for me, I learned mindfulness meditation in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Vietnamese Zen master, who is one of the teachers that always, I think, talked the most explicitly about the importance of having compassion for yourself as well as others. And so, again, the very first night I went home, I started trying to be more friendly and supportive to myself. And I was just so amazed by the immediate difference it had in my ability to cope with stuff. And so I eventually got a job at University of Texas at Austin. And at that point, no one had really done any academic research on self-compassion or even really defined it in a precise way. So I decided to, define it and start conducting research on it. And now there's like well over 8,000 studies. It's a whole field of study now. So it's just been amazing. Yeah.
That's an incredible amount of studies.
Yeah.
And yeah, you must
Because
have
it's
had
so effective. That's why. I mean, that's the thing. It's self-compassion. It's like a really common sense idea. It makes sense that you're going to be stronger if you're supportive as opposed to cutting yourself down. But there's actually a lot of reasons why we don't. So it's not necessarily natural, even though it makes a lot of sense. So, and it works. Yeah.
it definitely. Yeah, to my surprise, how effective it was and how quickly it works is, I mean, it's a relief for one, but it's also a bit of a surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
For any of the listeners that are new to self-compassion, how do you define it?
Yeah, so it's actually really straightforward. So we know what compassion is. Compassion is concern with the alleviation of suffering. And normally we think about when we have a good friend or, someone and they're struggling in some way, our heart opens, we feel warm and supportive toward them, we want to help in some way. Also, what makes it compassion and not pity, for instance, for another person is a sense of connectedness. Hey, I've been there. It's so human to have to be feeling that. And so self-compassion is just compassion turned inward, right? So we kind of have to be aware that we're suffering, acknowledge it, which is easy. It's easier to do with other people than ourselves because when we're so lost in it, often we don't even notice, like, wow, I'm having a hard time. Maybe I need some help here, right? So we acknowledge it with mindfulness. We remember we aren't alone, that it's part of common humanity to have struggles or make mistakes or be imperfect. And then warmth, kindness, and support, and the desire to help ourselves in some way.
Yeah, I remember highlighting the difference between empathy and compassion. And I think empathy, at least for me, was the more common trait. I think probably as I maybe got 13 onwards. And empathy is tiring. Empathy is very tiring.
Yeah, so empathy, I mean, some people use empathy as a synonym for compassion. I have empathy for that person. And, at the end of the day, they're just words. But in psychology, which is more precise, empathy is simply emotional resonance. So if you're in pain, I feel your pain. If you're happy, I feel your happiness. If you're tense, I feel your tension. And sometimes when I feel what you're feeling, and by the way, this is a human capacity. All brains have the ability, it's pre-verbal, it's built into our evolutionary structure of the brain. If you're empathizing with suffering, it can be really draining. People burn out or they shut down, or it also doesn't mean you necessarily care. I might realize that, oh, I feel empathetic resonance for the fact that you're kind of nervous. Maybe now's a good time to take advantage of you, right? So, whereas compassion, by definition, and again, they're just words, but we define it as concern with the alleviation of suffering. Also, compassion, like, loving kindness meditation, loving kindness, love, kindness is more general. It can be positive, it can be negative. The root word of compassion, passion, suffering, the suffering of the Christ. It's really how we are in the context of suffering, because sometimes it's the hardest to keep our hearts open when people are suffering or we're suffering. So that's another difference. Empathy can be with anything. Loving kindness can be with anything. Compassion is particularly how do we relate to suffering, our own or other people's. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It is particularly hard, especially on yourself, which I think you rightly highlighted. That seems to be the
Yeah.
most
Yeah,
important.
especially because we often blame ourselves for our suffering. We take things really personally. Sometimes it's obvious, like we made a mistake or we failed at something. But even sometimes when things are really hard, we feel like, this shouldn't be happening to me, or something's wrong with me because I'm experiencing this, or we're just really cold to ourselves. In a way that the vast majority of people are more compassionate to others than they are to themselves. We know that through the research. So
I remember, I think it's from Charlie Chaplin that he talks about if you zoom into human life, it's quite, or if you look on a small time scale, it's very tragic. But if you
Mhm.
zoom out, it's quite funny. And I mean,
Yeah,
that might not apply to every instance,
yeah,
but
yeah,
a lot of instances, I think, from that perspective, you
yeah,
hear a lot as people get towards like them dying, the hospice workers that study them, they seem to often have the same regrets, which would often be solved by compassion or self-compassion
yeah,
and so on and so forth.
yeah.
So
We
you
make
touched
things
on it.
harder for ourselves. We certainly do.
We
Yeah.
definitely do. So you touched on it briefly, and you've identified three core components of self-compassion. So self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Could you elaborate on either end of those?
Yeah, and so also each has its opposite. So starting with mindfulness, and this is the scale, my scale I created measures this. So it's mindfulness versus over identification. So in other words, when we're struggling in some way, we need to be, first of all, aware of it. It's like, instead of just like stiff upper lip it, or I'm just not gonna think about it. I'm gonna just problem solve. We don't pause to recognizing, hey, I'm having trouble here. Maybe I need a little support. We can't actually give ourselves compassion. But normally, and by the way, the opposite of self-compassion is more natural. So just to say, don't beat yourself up if you beat yourself up. The brain actually was designed through evolution. When we're threatened in some way, we go into fight, flight, or freeze, right? And so often what happens is when something happens, like we ruminate it, we get obsessed with it, we get identified with it, we get lost in it. This is just the brain, what the brain does, because there's a problem, all hands on deck. So it's hard for us to step back and say, see the bigger picture. Wow, you're struggling. What do you need right now? So it's being mindful versus over identified. And then having a sense of common humanity versus being isolated. Again, that the flee response. So evolutionarily, if we made a mistake and we pissed off the group, they would like shun us and we'd be kicked out. And there's a reason for that evolutionarily, but that's still built into us. So kind of mentally, we kind of kick ourselves out from the group. We feel like it's just us. There's something wrong with us. We flee into shame. kind of natural for the brain to do that, but it, of course, exacerbates things. So with self-compassion, we remember, wait a second, to be human does not mean to get it all right. To be human means you make mistakes, things happen. I mean, that's what humanity means. We certainly aren't alone, even though our brain is telling us, shun from the group, separate from the group, right? And then the last one is kindness versus harsh self-judgment. And again, if you think from the brain's point of view, evolutionarily, that fight response, like the judge ourselves, we're trying to control the situation. We aren't doing it because we're mean. We're doing it because we're trying to stay safe. And so again, our instinct is, well, if I fight the problem and I make it go away, or I force it or control it or make it some other way, then I'll be safe. And so we do that with ourselves, right? We judge ourselves, we criticize ourselves, we kind of like mentally like are hard on ourselves, thinking that we'll pay attention and won't do it again, so we'll be safe. But unfortunately, of course, what we know from the research is it makes us less safe because we can't focus and we've got anxiety, and it's just actually a lot harder to be safe when you're kneecapping yourself, right? But again, it's more natural. So we need to learn to be kind, warm, and supportive, and again, ask ourselves, well, what would help in this moment, as opposed to just calling ourselves names. And by the way, the three positive components, which are kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness, they're a lot more natural for other people because as mammals, we evolved to care for each other. Unfortunately, we didn't evolve to care for outgroup members, but our family, the people close to us, people in our community, those groups, our ancestors who cared for each other were more likely to survive and pass their genes down. You weren't so personally threatened if, your friend, let's say, makes a mistake, where in the same way you are yourself. So instead of fight, flight, or freeze, we go into tend and befriend mode. And so it's more natural we don't always do it, but it's more natural to do it for other people. So what we're really doing with self-compassion is we're hacking into that system that evolved to care for others, or making this U-turn, and we're treating ourselves the way we might treat someone else we cared about.
Beautifully put. And it's kind of hilarious. We also often the thing that we feel bad or guilty about, we can't really change when we're angry at ourselves. I find the ability to do something different is hindered. So it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It does. I mean, think about it. When you're filled with shame, you can barely even think straight. It's like it hollows your sense of self out. You just kind of like disappear, and you're just overwhelmed with the shame. You can't like make productive change. You can't have a good perspective. You can't see things, actually what might be a better way to approach this, because all you're doing is hanging your head in shame. It's really amotivating. It works, unfortunately. Well, I have to say, it does work kind of. We wouldn't do it if it didn't work at all, but it works the same way punishing a child works. Yeah, you'll get that child to pay attention to you, maybe do what you say, but you're going to cause that child so many problems that they aren't going to do nearly as well as if you said to that child, hey, there's a problem. How can I help you? What do you need? How can I support you? Then they're going to actually be able to make the change more effectively. So, and we know that without a doubt through the research that self-compassion is a more effective motivator than harsh self-criticism.
Yeah, definitely is. And even just the opportunity that how can we do this differently? You just immediately feel, okay, there's a new road to move down. There's a new way to behave, or there's a new opportunity to do things differently.
Yeah. And we don't have to take any of it personally. I mean, if you just think of the simple fact that like over 95% of all our information processing goes on outside of conscious awareness. It's like our body, it's our evolutionary history, it's our brain, it's our conditioning, it's our culture, it's our family, it's what we ate that day. I mean, the vast majority is we aren't really in control. It's just like happening below the threshold of conscious awareness. So why are we taking it so personally? I didn't choose to have that thought. I didn't choose to have that reaction. It just came up. So how do we relate to what's coming up? Do we say that it's me and blame ourselves, or do we say, that was a painful thought, or that was a painful reaction, and how can I help in this moment? We don't have to take it personally, which is the good news. But by the way, I know some people are saying, but don't we need personal responsibility? The research is really clear on this. We are more able to take personal responsibility when we don't take things so personally. In other words, let's say you make a mistake. Maybe, okay, I made a mistake. I feel badly about it. But just because I made a mistake doesn't mean I am a mistake. Meaning we don't take it personally, but it's something I did, which is not healthy. Then we're more able to like say sorry or try to think about how to fix it. But when you interpret it personally, like I am a mistake, then again, then all your, I'm not interested in making amends. I'm interested in like drinking or like you're doing something else to get rid of my pain. Because again, shame immobilizes us. It's a lot harder to take personal responsibility. And actually, if I could figure out a way to blame it on you, my clever little subconscious is going to try to do that because I feel a lot better if it's not my fault, especially when I'm taking things personally. So again, the research shows very clearly people who are more self-compassionate can take personal responsibility without necessarily, being mean to themselves or taking it personally in the sense of I'm a bad person. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredibly empowering and quite surprising also, actually. It's great that you're doing this research.
But again, but it makes sense, if you think of a child, if you say a child, hey, that, you're bad, it's going to be less effective. And that behavior was unhelpful, but you're a good person, but that behavior was unhelpful. How can I help you have the behavior that's more in line with who you are, as opposed to shaming that child, which is just, it'll kind of work, but it's going to be much harder and make things much murkier. And so it's more intuitive with other people. We just have to use that same wisdom with ourselves.
That's a really great point, actually, and a good way to look at it. And that also, I guess, points at the fluidity of the self as well.
The validity of the self.
The fluidity
Oh,
of
the
the self.
fluidity. Oh, I think you said the validity, which is
Ah,
also
no,
an
not
interesting
validity.
question, but also the fluidity. Yeah, the sense of self really makes things difficult. One of my first, actually, my first paper on self-compassion was entitled "Self-Compassion: a healthier alternative to self-esteem." Because self-esteem, which is in which the sense of self is front and center, by a good person or I'm a bad person, has a lot of problems. For instance, why do you feel like that you're a good person? Well, either because you're special and above average, or you're better than other people, or you're a success, things are going your way, you're attractive, people like you. Well, what happens when you fail? Or what happens when you get rejected? Or what happens when you see someone who's doing it better than you? Then your self-esteem takes a nosedive. Whereas self-compassion, your worth isn't dependent on, like, it's not so personal. Your worth is just because you're a human being. All human beings are intrinsically worthy of kindness and support and care, right? And then therefore our worth isn't contingent, it's not comparative, and it actually provides a much more stable sense of self-worth over time. So ironically, even though it's called self-compassion, if you don't like the word self, maybe you're Buddhist, you don't like the word self, just call it inner compassion. Because ironically, that sense of separate self reduces, it recedes into the background when we're aiming compassion inward as opposed to just doing it outward.
Yeah, which is a whole other avenue. And yeah, just extremely interesting. That is the way that it goes. We put a lot of focus on loving kindness as the initial object, and I think the differences are like limited. Actually, often when you get closer to that object, I find it'll often just transform into compassion naturally, which is a complete surprise. And then often the self will start to reduce, and
Yeah,
then more of an unconditional love will come for others or whatever.
right. Yeah, it's impersonal. Impersonal sounds like it's cold, but it's impersonal in the sense that it's not seeing people as separate. And actually, the less we see people as separate, the more loving we feel, the more warm we feel. So it's not cold at all once it's understood in that sense, that it's about lack of separation. Yeah.
Yeah, such a great thing to be studying. I imagine you've had a wonderful life.
Well, I've had my fair share of challenges, but yeah, it's been, I mean, I'm so blessed to have this be what I spend my time on and my work on, because it reminds me every single day of what's important.
Definitely, I feel you wouldn't look back at the end of your life and regret studying self-compassion, I don't think.
No, I'm like, if I were to, hey, seriously, if I were to get hit by a car tomorrow, I feel like, okay, I've done my bit. I've helped spread the word. It's incredibly gratifying. Yeah.
Yeah, I really can imagine. So, what are some of the common misconceptions that you're seeing on this sort of compassion?
Yeah, well, there are so many. Again, you might say our cultural conditioning makes it not, it's bad enough our biological conditioning, the fact that, we didn't evolve to be self-compassionate, but then you add in our cultural conditioning. So the biggest one is the belief that it's going to undermine our motivation, which I talked about before, which actually isn't true from research. It helps us. One of the things it does is it gives us a learning orientation as opposed to what's called a performance orientation. We want to try to improve, not because we want to look good, but because we want to learn. And of course, we know failure is our best teacher. So it facilitates learning from our mistakes. So it actually enhances not only motivation, but also performance. So, but that's a big block because people are used to motivating themselves with, cruelty, like punishment. Another big one is if they think it's weak, that self-compassion is just about going easy on yourself. And that's where the difference between tender and fierce self-compassion comes in, which is the distinction I make. So there's really two faces. Sometimes self-compassion has a softer form. It's about acceptance. We accept ourselves as imperfect human beings. We accept the fact that sometimes life is hard and our emotions are difficult. But we don't accept the fact that someone's treating us unfairly, or we don't accept the fact if we're doing a behavior that's harmful to ourselves or others. And that's what I like to call fierce self-compassion or action-oriented self-compassion. It's more aimed at behaviors and situations where we actually do something and we, take concrete, strong action for our own well-being. And so, for instance, combat soldiers who are more self-compassionate, they're more resilient. They get through because they're an ally as opposed to an enemy. So that's something people get confused about. Another big one is that people think it's selfish. Somehow they assume that you need to be self-sacrificing. Like we only have a certain amount of compassion, and I need to give it all to you, and I need to deny myself compassion. Completely misunderstanding how it works, because the more compassion flows inward, the more resources I have available to give to others. If I'm just one way giving and I'm, selfless, well, I might be selfless, but I'm also going to be burnt out and exhausted, and I'm going to have nothing left to give. Whereas if I give myself compassion, I also ask myself, well, what do I need? My needs count too. Maybe I need to take a break. Maybe I need to draw a boundary. Maybe it's just too much. That actually reduces, we have a lot of research showing this. It actually reduces your burnout levels, reduces, for instance, caregiver fatigue, and allows you to be a better relationship partner or a better caregiver. So there are others, but those are pretty much the main ones.
Yeah, that's such a good point, and it's really interesting that it does affect learning. Like if I look back at learning anything actually as a child, the fear of failing is less and the love for learning is more. And I feel like just recently I've come back in contact with that. But if I'm taking notes or something, I still feel the rush and then a bit of a fear will come in and then I'll have to slow myself down, bring some mindfulness and enjoyment back into it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I can really see how retention would increase too.
Yeah, because you're less distracted. I mean, anxiety, a certain amount of anxiety can be helpful, we're taking things seriously. But when it's personal, that again, when it's fear of failure, when it's about performance anxiety, look at athletes. Those athletes who are in flow state, which means they aren't thinking about themselves, they're just like letting their body do what they've trained to do. They perform a lot better than athletes who are worried about, like, oh, might I miss the shot? Or what does this say about me? That distracts them and actually really hinders their ability to play at their best. Same thing really in any important realm in life.
Does it actually increase flow states then? Because from that perspective, I imagine it would increase
So I
frequency.
think there is a scale developed to measure flow, and there is a correlation between the self-compassion scale and the flow scale. In terms of, I think I would be more interested in looking at behavioral measures. I don't know if there's been a behavioral study of flow. I could be wrong. There's 8 8,000 studies. I haven't read them all, but I do know that we taught college level athletes self-compassion, and we found that their performance improved. Like the coaches rated their performances improving, and so I would expect that part of that is because they could more easily get into a flow state. But that's a good question. I'll have to look it up later. Maybe someone's done that study. But yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely, because what the death nail for flow is worry about self-worry, performance anxieties absolutely kills it. And we know that self-compassion reduces performance anxiety. So I'm sure that it helps and also both ways as well. So when you're in a flow state, it's easier to be self-compassionate. It's not, I think this probably goes bi-directional. Yeah.
yeah, and that would correlate with the default mode network quieting as well, if compassion
Yes,
eases.
exactly. That's right. So so I think, yeah, there's been research on loving kindness meditation, which you might think is a proxy for self-compassion, reducing default mode network activation, and flow states, reducing default mode. Because again, when you take yourself out of the equation, when you aren't taking things so personally, that's what a state of self-compassion gives us. It's interesting though, if you just look at mindfulness, no, often when people are mindful, they naturally become more self-compassionate, their heart's open, but not always. I've had like 30-year mindfulness teachers take my training and say, wow, this is really different. Intentionally bringing in the warmth, because again, if you think about it, as mammals, when do we feel the least alone and separate? When we're being loved and cared for by others. That's just built into our physiology as mammals. So when we give ourselves that warmth and care, it's one thing just to be aware, not to be caught up in your thoughts and emotions. But when you add in the warmth, increases the safety, and I think that's what really decreases that sense of separation.
I agree. I've been sat on retreat with breath meditation and it felt completely cold and quite confused why I wasn't getting happier or feeling any love or softness towards myself. And since going and doing more intense heart-based meditations, it's
Yeah,
completely changed. I
yeah,
remember Thich Nhat Hanh describes the breath as the beautiful breath, which I
yes.
think like is more what it's transformed into. It's like it's actually a bit hard to differentiate between awareness and love at that point. It's like,
Yeah, well, at some point it is loving awareness. So, I mean, absolutely. So at some point you might even say all the distinctions break down. But when you aren't fully, you aren't full loving awareness, you can kind of be in awareness and kind of cold. You know, you could theoretically, I think, have the warmth and not the mindfulness. Then I would say, see, my model, mindfulness is actually a part of self-compassion. So the way I define self-compassion, you can't have the self-compassion without mindfulness. But it might look something like self-pity, for instance. Maybe that'd be the warmth, but no mindfulness or sense of connectedness. Um, yeah, but
yeah, I
you
definitely
can't have mindfulness without warmth. I've seen it done, and it's only a halfway measure. It's better than nothing, but it's not going to get you home. Home is our heart open. Yeah,
Yeah, I definitely agree. That seems to be the one that impacts behavior earlier
yeah,
on. And
yeah.
also, has it been, has there been, because what you will often see is when you're more compassionate, other people seem to respond to you different. And that could just be your own priors, your prior conceptions are not not the same. You're not kind of assuming or painting the world in that light. So that's changing. But is it measurable that people also do respond differently?
Well, yeah. So if you think about how empathic resonance works, um, our brains pick up what other people are feeling. So if you're like being cold and self-critical, your your neurons are firing this way. Other people, there's interpersonal, there's neuronal synchrony. We've measured this that goes on where my brain patterns are influenced by your brain patterns, and this is just done through evolution, right? So absolutely, if I'm being more warm and kind and caring to myself, and not only is it just through neuronal synchrony, but also just subtle expressions, subtle tone of voice, where we hold so many cues that cause this synchrony to occur, that's going to affect other people. So, for instance, therapists who practice more self-compassion, their patients feel more self-compassion. Modeling, verbally, out loud, or even just silently. Absolutely, that's not woo-woo. We just know that's how the human brain works.
That's
So,
even more empowering
yeah,
and also just such a motivator because if we
yeah.
do have low self-worth, if we know we're doing it for others, it's an extremely powerful motivator.
I mean, the thing about self-compassion being selfish, are you kidding? It's the best gift you can give other people, your friends, your children, not only because of your behavior, but even just your presence. You know when someone's like a more calmer, warmer, compassionate presence, it impacts you. It absolutely impacts other people. It's a gift you give to yourself and the world. How do you show up in the world? Do you show up with your heart open or your heart closed? It's really that simple.
And it really does just recharge the battery for you to
Yeah.
give to give so much more. Thank you so much for listening so far. I just thought I'd take a quick moment of your time to jump in and let you know that FitMind has recently transitioned to be an NGO. What this means is all of our future courses, the podcasts, and everything we release is now free. So you can download the incredible FitMind app on any of the app stores for free. This also means that we now survive entirely off donations. Whether or not you can help us financially is not a problem, but if you could just simply share this episode with someone you think that might benefit from it, or drop a like or comment, or even a review on the App Store, it massively helps us out and we really appreciate it. Our goal here is simply to help as many people as we can. Now, back to the episode. I really hope you enjoy the second half with Dr. Kristin Neff. Your research has been extremely extensive. You've touched on some of the more significant findings. Um, what else have you found, I guess?
Well, this actually, I think one of the things, I guess is not surprising, but there's a big physiological component to self-compassion. Again, because as mammals, we are actually built, attachment, love, care, it's built into our system. So our central nervous system is very activated. So for instance, physical touch is a really easy way to practice self-compassion. And what we find is that like putting your own hands on your heart increases heart rate variability, heart rate coherence, reduces cortisol in the same way that if someone else would like to give you a hug or put their hand on your shoulder. So the body doesn't really know the difference. So there was a study that came out of UC Berkeley a couple years ago that showed just 20 seconds a day of maybe putting your hand some supportive place and saying a few supportive words can significantly increase your self-compassion levels. So, in other words, it's not like you don't have to. Some people like to meditate. That's great. More power to you. Meditation is not for everyone. They don't have the time or the inclination. But you have at least 20 seconds. There's no one who doesn't at least have 20 seconds. And it can be enough to really change the way you relate to yourself. So it's powerful medicine, and because it is part of our physiology, it's not as hard as you might think to cultivate.
Oh, that's incredibly quick and also incredibly
Got
exciting.
20 seconds? I think you do. I'm sorry. If you at least go and do it, you go to the bathroom, or something.
So, how how are you finding it's affecting anxiety, depression, some of the other mental conditions that we're seeing?
Yeah, kind of fish sort of psychopathology, kind of negative mental states that cause a lot of pain and
Yeah.
problems for us, and it makes life a lot harder. So very strong negative correlations, and we know this, not only the correlational studies but also training studies. And it makes sense because if you look at like where does anxiety come from or depression come from? Well, so there's a lot of factors leading to it. Again, so we don't have to take it personally. It's our genetic history, it's our family upbringing, it's environment. But what happens is maybe a negative thought or a thought of sadness or self-judgment comes up. So if we don't meet that with compassion, but instead, like we get lost in it, we over-identify with it, we feel like it's just us, there's something wrong with us for having that feeling, and then we're cold and judgmental because not only do I have this thought, I judge myself for having this thought, then we get a negative spiral. Then we go in this downward negative spiral, and then a thought of sadness or maybe embarrassment might develop into depression, or a thought of fear. Again, why do I have this fear? And I'm the only person who's this happening to, and I feel all alone, so I'm even more afraid. And what's wrong with me? And then we're down into anxiety. So what self-compassion does is, some people call it an emotion regulation technique. It sounds so much more than that, but at the very least, it is an emotion regulation technique because it helps us deal with difficult thoughts and emotions in a way that's helpful rather than harmful. So it stops those negative spirals. The really interesting thing, though, is not only does it reduce negative states like post-traumatic stress disorder, suicidal ideation, alcohol addiction, body image, all the negative crap that happens from life, especially when we make it worse for ourselves. It also is linked to things like happiness, optimism, life satisfaction, even though the way we measure it is, how do you relate to suffering? We don't talk about how do you relate to yourself on a good day? We talk about, how do you relate to yourself when you make a big mistake? People who are kinder are, have more self-confidence, they're happier, they're more satisfied with their life. And that's because compassion is a positive emotion. It feels good when you feel connected to others. It feels good when you're present. It feels good when you feel that warmth of kindness. And so it's not like positive thinking. Positive thinking is trying to replace the negative thought with the positive thought. What we know from the research is that helps if you already have high self-esteem, but it makes it worse if you don't. So, and if you're one of those people that knows you're bullshitting yourself, it's not going to get you very far. So self-compassion doesn't replace the negative with the positive. It embraces the negative with the positive. It's like, oh, sadness. Oh, I'm so sorry. Give me that must be so hard. I care about you. What can I do to help? So you aren't denying the negative. You aren't papering over it. You aren't sugarcoating it. You're embracing yourself in the midst of it, like giving yourself support, warmth. You aren't alone. Hey, I'm here for you. What do you need? And because that warmth and support feels good, it creates this upward spiral. What they call in positive psychology the broaden and build cycle. And that leads, once you aren't so hooked in by the negative and you've got more space, then you can notice like opportunities. I'm not so locked into my negative thought. I can say, well, actually, I didn't think about that. Maybe I'll try this, or maybe I can call that person, or maybe there's another way to look at this. And then we get the broaden and build cycle. So it's actually considered part of the positive psychology movement. Wasn't sure what to do with self-compassion for a while because by definition it's aimed at suffering. But now it's considered part of the pantheon of positive things to cultivate, because again, it leads to other positive emotions in a very reliable way. So it's like magic.
It really
You
is
can
like
see why I'm
magic.
so excited by it. It makes so much sense. But it's counterintuitive at first until you think about it, then it makes total sense.
Yeah, agreed. Any perspective you've given is like, oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
hindsight.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, of course. Well, why didn't I think of it that way? But again, there's two main reasons: our conditioning, our biological evolutionary conditioning, and our cultural conditioning, which is really hard to overcome.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It takes
But
a
not
lot.
impossible. 20 seconds a day.
Yeah, it's it's finite as well, which is
Yeah.
always also a big surprise because it feels infinite initially when you start looking at suffering.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. But of course, if you don't look at it and you pretend it's not there, then it's like the untapped scene is very, very scary. But when you can look at it, when you can face it and you can get through it, then it's actually less overwhelming and it feels less infinite. And then you realize,
Definitely.
oh, it's a moment of suffering that will pass. Some suffering takes longer to pass than others, but everything changes, as we know. So
Definitely. And just incredibly, I mean, you touched on it briefly, but that becomes a positive feedback loop then at some point.
yeah, it does. Again, that's what that broaden and build cycle, right? So you bring these positive emotions to it, and then this is the really interesting, another way I've been talking about self-compassion. So it actually can change what you're feeling, so it becomes more positive. But even when you can't, let's say, grief, very, grief just has its course. Sometimes it's a long-term thing. It's not going to budge much, or, something really difficult. What's happening is with self-compassion, you're less focused on what's happening, even if what's happening is painful. You aren't ignoring it, but you aren't identified with it. You become identified with how you're relating to what's happening. So, I mean, I talk about this in my book. I have a son with autism, and he's doing great now. But when he was younger, he'd have these horrible tantrums, and I would practice self-compassion. And instead of being like focused on the tantrum, I'd be focused on my open heart in the midst of the tantrum. Like, this is really hard, Kristin. I'm here for you. You aren't alone. It's going to be okay. I love you. I care about you. And so it's like you move from being lost in what's happening to resting your awareness, so to speak, and the loving kindness and the warmth and connection that's holding what's happening. And so even in the midst of a really bad situation, your mind can still be filled with loving, connected presence. And that's really where happiness is. Happiness is not to be found ultimately in what's happening. It's to be it's to be found in who we are. How are we showing up at the moment? Is our heart open, or is it closed? And that's the beautiful thing about it. It doesn't even need to change what's happening, although it does help. It kind of changes your perspective, which is why it's so powerful.
If someone is struggling with self-criticism, what would be the steps that you would recommend to start to cultivate self-compassion?
Right. So I think the first step is to recognize that self-criticism is a natural behavior. Again, your brain was designed to criticize itself, to go into fight, flight, or freeze. It's also encouraged by our culture in many ways, sometimes maybe more implicitly. So the first step is to realize that the reason you're criticizing yourself is because at some level you want to keep yourself safe. At some level you care about yourself. You want to be happier. You want to be safe, which is why you're doing it. So you might say, start with having compassion for the fact that you're self-critical. Please don't say, oh, I heard this Dr. Neff and she says we should be self-compassionate, and I'm bad at that. I'm self-critical. Don't criticize yourself for criticizing yourself, right? So realize you're doing it to keep yourself safe. And then the second step is to realize that there's more effective ways to help you be safe and well, and have things go better in your life. And that the encouragement is actually more effective than this criticism. So, it kind of depends what you're criticizing yourself for. And you might need some more tender self-compassion, or you might need some more fierce self-compassion. The tender self-compassion is about acceptance, accepting the fact that, yeah, you're only human. You aren't perfect. Things are going to go wrong. That's okay. You aren't alone. And can you bring some warmth and understanding and support to yourself, to the imperfection of yourself or the imperfection of your life? Because the self-criticism, it's like we're trying to control things, again, which is totally natural. But unfortunately, it makes it harder to make effective change when we're desperately trying to control things, especially in this kind of violent, negative manner. So you might need some acceptance of yourself or your situation, or you might need some fierce self-compassion, which means some action. So maybe there is something that you can try to change, either in a behavior you're engaged in or in a situation. Maybe you're in a situation that's not healthy for you. Making that change from love and encouragement, as opposed to you better do it or else, or that fear of punishment. Or maybe you need to, give a little more attention to your own needs. Maybe you're so focused on problem solving or meeting other people's needs, but maybe you even haven't asked, do I need to spend more time on, I don't know, exercising or eating better, or maybe taking time for myself, or fulfilling something that's going to make me happy? Like maybe you love music or nature, really taking some actions like that. Um, or again, protecting yourself. Maybe there are some people in your life that maybe you need to draw a few boundaries, and maybe they won't like you as much if you draw that boundary. But if you like yourself more, is it the end of the world if they don't like you? So, I mean, sometimes it may be, but sometimes it may not. And so really, once you open the door to self-compassion in its many forms, it's gonna help you meet your need for safety and belonging in a much more direct and effective manner. But remembering that self-criticism is kind of an ineffective way to try to get safety and belonging. So kind of honor that part of yourself. Thank you for trying to help me be safe and to belong. Appreciate that. And I think this may be a little more effective way I'm going to try to do it this time. Is that okay? You can have the conversation with your inner critic. You really can. And it's because like the inner critic, if it thinks you're ignoring it, from this point of view, the world's gonna end. But if you say, hey, listen, get it, need to be safe, want to belong, good, gotcha. Thank you so much for pointing this out. Can we try some other ways that see if they work a little better? This kind of draws a little bit. I'm pretty good friends with Dick Schwartz, who created internal family systems therapy or parts therapy. And it kind of is consistent with those principles. Yeah.
Yeah, I keep meaning to do it. I've got the course with Locke Kelly.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I love Locke Kelly. Yeah, great.
Yeah,
I would
he's a great
recommend
teacher.
it. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, amazing. I need to get into it. I accidentally bought two, and they're both quite extensive. So
Right. Okay. Yeah, only have so much time. Yeah, got it. Don't beat yourself up, Josh.
yeah, that's it. Gentle, gentle. So I should have asked you before, but if you feel comfortable, could we go through a small self-compassion
Oh,
exercise or
sure. Yeah,
amazing?
absolutely. So one of my favorite exercises is called the self-compassion break because it's very easy. What we do is we're going to call up something that's distressing in some way or some smallish form of suffering. And we're just going to bring in the three components of self-compassion. We're going to bring in mindfulness, so we're mindfully aware as opposed to being lost in the difficulty or the negative situation. We're going to bring in a sense of common humanity, remind ourselves that we aren't alone. And then we're going to bring in some warmth and kindness. And the way we're going to bring in the kindness isn't just through language, but also through touch, which we know is a really direct way to make us feel, again, cared for. All right, so I'm going to close my eyes as I do this, or so you might close your eyes, or you can, if you're listening, watching this, you can close your eyes. You can open them if you want, but I'm going to close my eyes. And so just think of something that's troubling you right now, something real in your life. Maybe you have a relationship issue going on that's challenging, or maybe you're worried about something. It could be something going on at work, health issue, right? So you can just choose something that's distressing, but not overwhelmingly so, because then you won't be able to actually focus on learning the practice. Just figure out something that feels right to work with. Just to let yourself kind of become familiar with what's happening and how you're feeling right now. And so the first thing we want to do is just bring some mindful awareness to the difficulty of what you're struggling with. It's hard. It hurts. So we don't want to ignore this fact. We want to recognize it, but we also don't want to get lost in the pain either. So see if you can just kind of be aware of this fact that it's painful, it's difficult, it's challenging, without getting totally sucked into it. Okay, this is hard. And then reminding ourselves of common humanity. There might be part of you that feels like this shouldn't be happening to you, or there's something wrong with you because this is happening, or, that you're all alone. Everyone else in the world is living a normal, perfect life, and it's just you who's having this situation. So just remind yourself of the truth. You aren't alone. There's nothing wrong with you for having this happen. This is part of being human. Many human beings have things like this happen to them. It's it's part of life. It's part of what makes us human beings. So see if you can just for a moment feel your connectedness to other people who are also struggling. And then we want to bring in some warmth or kindness. So one way to do that is through physical touch. So you might put your both hands on your heart or give yourself a little hug or maybe cradle your face, whatever feels comfortable for you, some sort of physical touch. Just feeling the physical warmth of your hands on your body. Letting that warmth kind of seep into you. You're literally holding your distress, pain. And then see if you can say some words of kindness and support to yourself. And again, not sugarcoating, but just something the type of thing you may say to a good friend. Like, I'm here for you. I'm so sorry this is so hard. What do you need? Maybe you need some words of acceptance. Like, you're doing the best you can. Or maybe you need some words of patience. This won't last forever. Take it day by day. Or maybe you need some words of fierce encouragement. Like, you need to say no. Or is there something you can do differently that may help? Only you know what you need to hear. So see if you can say those words that are just what you need to hear right now. Then letting the words go, letting the practice go, and opening your eyes.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was beautiful. That was really beautiful. I think actually the way you have presented it, it's so foundational. It felt, yeah, just bigger or more powerful in a way. And I think, yeah, often people will go in and start to learn. We touched on what the Dalai Lama said earlier, but start to learn loving kindness or compassion, and they're missing the self compassion or that foundational practice. And probably you don't need anything more, as we said, that will then start to, as the self drops out, it will start to expand to others naturally.
It will.
So, yeah.
I do want to just make a comment. Sometimes there's a phenomenon that's often commonly called backdraft, which is, when you open the doors of a house on fire, the fresh air rushes in, sometimes it ignites the flames. Something actually can happen like that with self-compassion practice. If you've had to stay safe, to close your heart, and you do a practice like that and you open your heart, sometimes it's like the love rushes in, ignites the old pain, and it can kind of, sometimes you don't feel good after doing a practice like that. It's not the self-compassion that's causing the pain. What's happening is it's releasing the pain into like the fresh air, and it needs to be released to be healed. But at the end of the day, in order to be self-compassionate, we need to say, what do I need to be safe? And sometimes that's a little too much for people. So sometimes maybe you don't touch yourself. Maybe that's too much. Or, maybe you just do something else, like have a cup of tea, a warm cup of tea. So if some people do that practice and didn't feel like the warm fuzzies and felt like, shit, that was a reaction, That's also very natural. You aren't alone, and it can happen. It's actually a good sign. It means you're doing it right. But it also may be a signal to sometimes slow down a little bit. So self-compassion is very like individualized. Is what do you need? Some people it's too much to touch themselves. Maybe they have an abuse history, but maybe you can pet your dog or your cat, or again, or there's really, you could customize what it is that you need in a way that feels safe and right just for you. Yeah.
Yeah, good to highlight that. And that reminds me actually, one of the common issues would be forgiveness. But it feels like with this approach, you might not necessarily need to address forgiveness directly. Do you find you still need to visit forgiveness sometimes?
Yeah, so they aren't exactly the same, whether it's self-forgiveness or forgiveness of others. I think compassion so forgiveness, I mean, it depends how you define it, but if you define forgiveness as the letting go of the resentment, just letting things go. We're just going to move on, right? I'm ready to just move on, let it go, forgive. I'd say compassion is a first step. And if you jumped, but it's not only a first step, it's a necessary step. So compassion is opening to the pain of the harm. Forgiveness is like letting it go and moving on. So if I forgive you, and don't open to the pain that you've caused me with compassion, like self-compassion, like really honoring, wow, that really hurt, and holding my pain. And if I forgive you and move on as a way of avoiding the pain, it's not really going to work. Or similarly, if I forgive myself as a way of avoiding the pain of, wow, I really hurt you, that's not going to be helpful either. So we kind of have to start with compassion, which is opening to the pain of the harm done, either caused by us or done to us. And then sometimes, we aren't ready to move on, or, maybe I'll consider the possibility of at some point moving on, but right now all I can do is hold my pain. So the letting go of what happened, I think, is the second step that can only really happen after we have compassion. And, sometimes it may not be the right thing for some people. But, here's the thing, like, let's say you hurt me, Josh, and I have compassion for the pain you caused me. I may not be ready to move on, but I don't have to make it personal, right? I can have compassion for the fact that, who knows what led you to do it? It's your biology, it's your history, it's all that 95% of your unconscious processing. I don't have to blame you for it personally, but I may not want to move on in terms of like, maybe we just like call it a day. I'm blocking you from my phone, Josh, or my email. No, just kidding. But you know what I mean? So I think they're kind of slightly separate issues.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. And yeah, that definitely points to. I remember I had that thought when I was young, actually, and that was part of the issue I had with sort of the religion I was getting presented at the time. It was like, how could I truly blame that person? Because like they've been exposed to what they've been exposed to, and
Yeah.
they're not really in control of that. There's so many factors, or I think Gabor Mate talks about like the majority of health issues he sees have trauma, like extensive trauma in the past. So of course they're reacting to situations in a certain way.
And it's not even, there's a crazy thing. It's not even just like what happened to us, but it's stored in our DNA and like the telomeres. And it's like, it's biological and historical as well as your immediate conditioning. Again, so many factors, the vast majority of factors that goes into determining what is it that we're thinking moment by moment or feeling moment to moment, physically or emotionally, totally out of our control. We aren't even aware of like the vast majority of it. So who are we to blame ourselves or others for it? At the same time, you got to draw boundaries. You can't, you didn't choose to do that perhaps, but I also may choose to draw a boundary out of self-protection. But again, we don't have to take any of it so personally. Um, it's of course is easier said than done. But yeah.
Definitely. I remember one of my teachers said when you do forgiveness, you're not forgiving that person. You're forgiving yourself, actually. It's you that feels the relief. It's not that person.
Yeah, yeah. What I would probably call that what you're really doing is you're giving yourself compassion. Um, And but these come in stages, you know. It's a big thing to ask someone to let go of something if someone's really harmed them, or even yourself. You can have compassion for yourself and say, I'm not quite ready to move on, to let go and forgive, but I can at least start with compassion. I can understand. Uh, so,
Definitely. And you don't have to agree with what they did,
of
or
course not.
yeah, you don't ever have to.
And you can still block them from your phone.
Indeed. So, yeah, as we start to wrap up, just given the increasing awareness of like societal issues and the need for collective action, yeah, how can self-compassion support individuals that might be like navigating their roles as change makers, or, well, particularly without succumbing to burnout?
Yeah, well, and that's why, you know, the fear self-compassion is so important. I wrote the whole book, Fear Self-Compassion, because when we care, it's not just about acceptance of ourselves or our emotions. It means we need to take action, and sometimes that means like social justice action, going to protests. Um, but again, we need the fierce and the tender. So if we're all about action as a way of caring for ourselves and others, and there's none of like that recharging of the acceptance of the tender, nurturing part of self-compassion, we will burn out. So like if you're a social activist, and you know the world's got a lot of stuff going on right now, I don't need to explain it. It's a tough world out there, and a lot of action needs to be taken if we want to save the planet and kind of minimize the harm done. And it is an act of self-compassion to make change, to protest, to speak up, to say no, to draw boundaries, to do something, to try to be different. Uh, but so again, as you do that, which is the fierce self-compassion, it's like yin and yang. You know, the Chinese philosophers, they knew what they were talking about way back when, right? So if you think of the yang energy as the active energy, the fierce self-compassion, the yin is the more gentle, nurturing, kind of accepting energy. As we take our action, we need to make sure that we are still kind of accepting of ourselves as people, accepting of other. So if you dehumanize others as you take your action, if you take action against people as opposed to just saying standing up for minimizing harm being done to people, then you're just perpetuating the problem. Right. So having that acceptance, the yin, the tender is always about the people, accepting ourselves unconditionally, accepting other people, not their actions or behaviors, but them as people unconditionally, combined with the, okay, what actions are going to be most helpful? What do I need to do to protect people? I call it mama bear self-compassion. You know, we need both. Um, but again, it's tricky, and we're going to get it wrong, and we're going to get imbalanced and get back. But you know, it's like a process. It's not an endpoint.
How do you think we do get it in more places? For anyone that doesn't follow Kristen on social media, it's like a bright light in
Thank you.
in the sea of information. It's incredibly inspiring. Particularly, I've enjoyed on LinkedIn, where you don't often see that kind of post.
Oh yeah, I don't link my personal links on. I don't do a lot of LinkedIn, but yeah, it's true. It's probably probably should do more there because it's not normal. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um.
it's extremely effective. I've been reposting you often,
Oh,
so
thank you.
thank you for that.
But
So if anyone does want to find out more, if they want to learn,
yeah, well, I
what
would say
can
go just Google self-compassion. You'll find my website, selfcompassion.org. I got a lot of free resources there. I also have a community online where we got even more resources and practices, and a whole video library of like information, and I have live events. I have people on, like I just had Dick Schwartz on and Dan Harris and Tara Brock. So you know, if you want to go a little further, you can become a self-compassion community member. And I also have, I think, 5 books now. It's another way to start. You can find, but I would say start at my website, because then that's kind of the hub, and then it'll let you know what resources are available for you. And also
amazing.
take the self-compassion scale if you're curious and want to know your level, but don't judge yourself if you score low.
Know that you can move in a different direction at any
Yeah,
point
that's
of
right.
life. Amazing. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, the work you're doing is incredible, and keep going. Yeah, Yeah, I'll definitely be keeping an eye on the website and everything else that you do.
Great. Thanks, Josh. It's been a pleasure.
Again, thank you so much for listening to the episode. We really hope you enjoyed it. I just wanted to take a quick moment to say that we recently released a 30 days of meditation, science, and bliss course. You can find that here on YouTube or over at the app. We do find that the app offers a much better experience, and then you get daily reminders and you can really track your mental fitness. So highly recommend checking that out.